Welcome everybody to the RFP Success Show. I am your host, Lisa Rehurick, the #1 sought after authority on RFP success. And each week we bring you information, strategy, or resources to help you win more business through RFPs and hopefully have a little bit of fun doing it. So let's get this week's episode started. We are introducing you to Sandra Younger. She is the founder and principal at Comeback Solutions and founder, chief story strategist at Strategic Story Solutions. And what I love about Sandra is that she kind of sees things from this holistic view. Most of my experience with Sandra has been her helping me with my own story. And her and I were chatting the other day, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is a great conversation to have with my RFP audience because so here's the deal. She has a journalism degree, an English degree. She's been a reporter, a magazine editor, an author. She holds these fantastic writing workshops, but she just gets it. She gets how to weave all of this together, tell really great stories, but also how to take your writing from too heavy and too technical down to something that the person on the other end can really understand and relate to. And so we're going to actually do 2 different podcast episodes. So this is one of 2. We're going to start out by talking about writing. The other thing I want to say about her is that she's got a phenomenal book called The Fire Outside My Window. I've read it twice. I've given it out. I own like 3 copies. I'm a huge fan. And it's all her perspective on the Cedar Fire, which was a huge fire in California. I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that. But Sandra, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Lisa, what a delight to be here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about the book. Because you and I, before we hit the record, show it on the screen. So for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see it on the screen there. The Fire Outside My Window.
Yes.
And because before we hit record, you and I were chit-chatting about how it's got a unique perspective. So I want you to talk about that, but I also want you to tell them a little bit about the book and how it came to be.
The book has a unique perspective in that it is the only book, to my knowledge, that tells the complete story of one of these catastrophic wildfires that unfortunately we're seeing more and more often. It tells a complete story in that it tells the people's side of it as well as the firefighters' side of it. All the other books out there that talk about wildfires are written from the firefighter's point of view. And my book tells what it's like as a member of the public to wake up literally to fire outside your window and find yourself in the path of one of these hellacious monsters that are taking so much property, so much land, so many lives.
And in true storytelling fashion, it is a harrowing read because you are telling us the story of how you and your family with your animals and everything in tow escaped that fire. And, anyway, it's an amazing book. And it just hit some #1 stuff, right? Like, tell us more about that.
Yes, the #1 stuff. Yay. It's very exciting. The book has been out now for 5 years. And with the unfortunate relevance that it's retained because of these the relevance isn't unfortunate, but the reason is unfortunate. Yes. With all of the escalation in fire regimes we're seeing around the world, not just here in the U.S., my publisher decided to market the book a little bit more. And so with that boost, it hit #1 just recently across 4 different Amazon categories, from earth sciences to conservation to environmentalism to natural disasters.
That's amazing.
Shows me that a lot of people are interested in knowing what it's like as a firefighter and as a member of the public to be caught up in one of these dramatic disaster stories.
Horrible. And you're right. I mean, it's horrible that it had to come back around, or the reasons that it came back around, but congratulations to you for that. And it is relevant. And, I know you also have a comeback formula that we can talk about in a little bit that is part of that, for anybody listening that's like, okay, wait a minute, I also want to know about her book because I live in wildfire country. You've got to read the book. It's fantastic. She's got a comeback formula to help people that have had to deal with all of this. And she'll tell us about that at the end. We'll put that in the show notes. But with all of this now, you know, you've written this book because you're a journalist and because you're a fantastic writer. For our listeners, like, okay, what does any of this have to do with RFPs? Well, guess what? We have to write RFPs to relate to the reader. And so I don't care what kind of writing you're doing, you still have to figure out how to relate to the reader, right? So I'm going to just kick off by asking you, what do you think frustrates people the most about the writing process in general?
It's the same thing that frustrates professional writers like me. And that is just getting started and getting in the zone where you feel like the writing is flowing instead of having wisdom teeth extracted, because that's what it can feel like. And if you think that professional writers are any different, we're not. I mean, every now and then, Lisa, I meet somebody that says, "Oh, I just love writing," and I think, good for you, because for the rest of it, it's tough, and it's tough to get started.
Yeah.
Once you are there, then the writing can flow. But it's like anything else, you know, it's sort of like hard to put on your gym shoes and get out there and do something. But once you're out there, sometimes you think, oh, this isn't so bad. This actually is enjoyable. And certainly when you're done, you're happy you did it, right?
Yes.
So I think just that part of getting over the initial inertia is what really frustrates most people who are sitting down to write something.
I love that too, that even you as a professional writer, that you struggle with that, because I think sometimes,
for sure.
yeah,
my one and only book came out 5 years ago. Why haven't I done another one? You know, there's a story, but it's tough.
Because I hear that all the time from people. Like, a lot of times the RFP writers are not writers per se. They're being pulled because they're technically savvy. They're the subject matter experts, and they're being pulled in, and they say, "I'm not a writer," but you know best. So in that vein, for technical writers that are listening, or even for people that have to take technical writing and simplify it, what advice would you give somebody that needs to go from really technical to putting it into something that the person on the other end can actually understand, or something that they actually want to read, right? Because it's not just about the specs. It's about like, hey, I've got 5 of these to read. How am I going to want to read yours?
Well, there are 3 different chunks that I teach as part of my corporate writing workshops. And this speaks to the first one, which is to know your audience and to realize you're not probably delivering a technical, juried, peer-reviewed article to a scholarly conference. You're talking to human beings. Yes. So what you want to do is, even if you're going to be talking about technical stuff, you want to keep it conversational. Because guess what? You're a person, not a robot. When you all of a sudden think, I've got to sound official and professional and technical, like I know my stuff, then you get into this robot mode, and it comes across as inauthentic. And guess what? The person who's reading on the other end is also not a robot. It's not Mr. Data, Commander Data. It is a person like you who will be ever so grateful for an RFP written in actual conversational, comprehensible language. Imagine they have a stack this tall of different RFPs to go through. When they hit one that doesn't make their eyes glaze over, you better believe it's going to jump to the top. It's going to stick in their minds. It's going to stand out. So what I would say to technical writers is, yes, you deal in the technical stuff. You have to be very clinical on the job, but you are first and foremost now communicating with another human being. So pretend that you're sitting across the table at Starbucks or somewhere having a conversation with this person, and talk like that.
That is such a great way. You know, I tell my people all the time, my listeners, my clients, and everybody all the time, is like, remember that they're human on the other end. And just to what you said, they've got stacks of these. How can you not bore them? And I think that conversational piece is hugely important, because that's why novels are so popular,
That's
right?
right.
Is because
Right.
people want to kind of get in, and there's an emotion. This is another thing. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking about putting a little bit more emotion into your writing. Is that how you would do that, through conversation, more conversational writing, or is there another way to evoke emotion?
Well, you can do it through conversational writing, but the best and most powerful way to create emotional connection, which we know now is scientifically proven to connect the to encourage sales, right?
Ooh,
Because emotional connection is necessary to build trust, and trust is necessary to boost sales. I could go to a lot of different people to buy my stuff or to award them my proposal, but my grant. But if I don't trust them, I'm not going to do business with them. I'm going to go on to the next person.
yeah.
So the number one most powerful way to build that emotional connection and trust and convert people is through storytelling, which I know we're going to get into later. But if you combine conversational language and storytelling, that's a win-win.
Yeah. So, for all the listeners, part 2 of this podcast is going to be solely about storytelling. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper, but let's talk about that just at least a little bit here. Is, what do you mean by storytelling? Hey, I'm responding to an RFP about, law enforcement services. How on earth can I tell a story that fits into that kind of a response? Like, what does that even mean? What would that look like? I'm putting you on
Well,
the spot here.
it depends on the different sections that are required
Yeah.
for your RFP, and you're the expert on that. I don't honestly know what they are, but I would say that anywhere is possible to squeeze in a story, do it. And it doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out screenplay or novel or anything. But if you'll notice, a lot of especially nonprofit organizations
Mhm.
tell stories about the people they've helped. And it's usually a before and after kind of story. It's, oh, little Jimmy couldn't read because I'm just totally making something up now,
Right,
Lisa.
right.
The teacher really wasn't teaching in ways that would help him, but our special tutoring service understood Jimmy, and now he's performing 3 grade levels above his age, something like that, right?
Yep.
So if you can use examples of what your service or what your goods do for people, that is a kind of storytelling.
Yeah,
That
so case studies to some degree, but
case
make it a little
studies,
bit more
right,
story
right.
esque. Okay.
Yeah, and these are things we'll get into more, and I hope people stay tuned for the storytelling special,
Yeah.
because there are various kinds of stories that businesses can use, but case studies are one of them.
I love it. I love it. And I'm so excited to talk about that too, because I think, I very seldom see anything like that weaved into RFP responses. And I believe that could really set people apart.
Sure.
It takes time and effort, as does any good writing, right? But
Yeah, but it's not as hard to tell a story because we do that naturally as it is to put together a research paper based on pie charts and bar graphs.
Great point. Yeah,
Yeah,
that story should come pretty naturally to
yeah,
us,
right.
hopefully. I love that. Oh, okay. So, you talked about this a second ago, but as you know, our listeners are writing to sell,
Yeah,
right, via this RFP response. So, one of the things that I love about an RFP response is that you already know that they want what you have, right?
right.
It's like a warm or a hot call versus trying to qualify them,
Ooh, that's a good point. I never
right?
thought about that, but yeah, that's basic, isn't it?
Yeah. And so
Wow.
we've already gotten over that hump, but still, then we have to write to sell. So, what are some tips you can give our listeners when they are writing specifically to influence a sale?
Well, storytelling is still a big part of it
Yep.
because, as we've just discussed, you cannot sell to people who don't trust you.
Yeah.
And the best way to build trust is to tell a story because stories create emotional connection. We have lots and lots of of studies that do use pie charts and bar graphs. Now, clinical research that proves this. So storytelling is a part of it. Also, you've got to know your audience. You've got to know these people. And fortunately, when somebody puts out an RFP, they tell you a lot about them, right? Here's who we are, here's what we do, here's what we're looking for. So you have some intel already. But if you can get inside their minds and know exactly what it is, if you can kind of read between the lines, or if you can do some research to find out what is it these people really worry about. This is what they're telling the public they want, but when they wake up in the middle of the night and they can't get back to sleep, what are they really worried about?
Yes.
And if you can put that in there, they think, oh my gosh, this person really gets us. She gets it. She knows. He understands our real issue. We didn't even maybe talk about that, but he really gets it. So some of the training you and I took together, we call these headline questions of attraction, right? And we put them on our web page, on our homepage. Like, do you feel like you're the only one in your social group who's behind the trends? Do you not know how to shop correctly for your body shape and type and those kinds of things? And you're thinking, yes, yes, yes. And then you get to the point where you can tell them what you have to offer, and you warm them up because they trust you. They know that you get it. You understand what they're concerned about. So that's a really important, that's step one, is knowing your audience and what they're really worried about. Step two is telling the stories. Tell them your story, your personal or your corporate story, your core story, your origin story, whatever you want to call it, so that they understand why you're so passionate about helping them, why you do what you do, why you know what you know, and why you're passionate about sharing it with them. And then the third thing is the call to action. Hello, it's no good to tell them that you're the one for them and that you have the solution and here's why they can trust you if you don't ask for the sale. So a call to action is always a part of any sales discussion.
So much goodness in what you just said. I want to address the second one, which was you asked some questions right before you got into the statements of here's what we do. And those questions are really powerful because I feel like it disarms them a little bit. Like it's not just me spouting expertise at them, but I'm asking some questions to make them think. Is that something that you recommend to help with that trust and that emotion piece?
I think it helps with trust because it lets them know that you understand who they are. Right? For example, if you're looking for, what's an example? Let's say you're looking for a business coach, right?
Okay.
And you want a coach who has a successful business themselves.
Right.
So if you find someone who asks you a bunch of questions that indicates they've been there and they know exactly what you're dealing with, and yet they've managed to overcome those hurdles and become successful themselves, that builds trust. That also is storytelling, basically. But the questions pull them in to it, I think, because the problem you can run into in storytelling is making it all about you and not enough about them. So if you start with some of these questions that let them know that you understand what goes on in their heads, then you're starting with them. You're starting with them and their pain points and letting them know that you do understand.
Yeah, and getting them to think through that, just getting them to think about it from their perspective in that moment, right? Getting them to kind of tune into themselves instead of feeling like the dryness of the reading. So I'm a big proponent of asking questions, especially I always tell people they should ask questions to plant some seeds of doubt when they're bidding on a contract that has an incumbent attached to it. So somebody's already in there, they're trying to unseat the incumbent. And I always say,
Oh,
hey, ask some questions in your proposal that, like, you don't want to bash your competitors, but if you ask some questions that maybe your competitors can't say yes to, it makes them
I
start.
like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, are you completely happy with the this, that, and the other? And
Yes.
do you wonder why you paid all this money for consulting and yet you're still not getting the results you wanted? That kind of stuff?
Yes.
That would
And
be
even a
great.
little bit deeper, right? So I love that you
Mhm.
addressed that's really cool. So something else that triggered when you were saying that is that, we've got people that are evaluating these proposals that are evaluating it based on an entity, right?
Mhm.
Probably a company or a government agency or whatever that looks like. But then you've got human beings who are doing the evaluating. And you
Yes.
kind of got to address both of them, right? And there's a whole bunch of different styles, personality styles and moods and experience levels and all of that with the people that are reading it. And how do
Mhm.
you write so that you're addressing that? And I know that's a big question, but I know you've got to think about that when you're writing a book like The Fire
Yeah.
Outside My Window too, right? Like,
Right.
you want multiple people to relate to it. So how do you address that?
That's an interesting dilemma, not knowing exactly who's going to be on the other end. Um, if you can find out who's going to be on the other end, I would. Like, if you find out um, just some basic demographics, is this going to be, a 55-year-old senior manager, or is this going to be the 3 years out of college millennial? That would be helpful. But I think that could be a little dangerous, because even if you have someone lower in the organization who's screening these things, they'll probably get popped up the ladder
Yeah.
for final approval. So you don't want to sound too, well, you never want to sound street, even though I told you to sound
Right.
conversational. You know, you
Well,
don't want
there's
to
a
sound
line
like
there though,
you're
right?
trying
Like,
to be a rapper or something.
right.
But you want to be professional and yet conversational. So I think that would be what I would shoot for no matter what. And then just to show that you have an understanding of their industry, their field, by using appropriate language without getting too jargony. I mean, I think those are sort of um, fundamentals
Yeah.
that would serve you well across a large range of people who might pick up that proposal.
I love it. I love the
Yeah. Yeah,
professional and
professional
conversational.
but conversational. And another thing you can do is look at their corporate audience
Yeah.
and think about them. If you were writing this to them, what would you say? So that
Mm,
might be another way to think of that.
that's good. I like that.
Yeah, it's
Good.
hard to know. It's hard if you don't know exactly who's going to be there, but I would certainly want to write something that, if it got all the way up to the CEO, would be credible to that person.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. Thank
Mhm.
you. All
Yeah.
right. So we talked earlier in the call about how hard it is to get started. Do you have any tips for somebody to get them started?
I
Uh,
do. And now
Yay.
I'm preaching to myself, but here's what you do. You unplug. You got to turn off
Mm.
the browser because it's just too tempting. I set up a little protocol for myself. I figured out what worked for me, what happened, and I worked with a coach on this when I was writing the book. I actually quit
Cool.
my job, Lisa, to write the book. And 8 months in, I'm thinking, I have no money and I have no book, so I got to do something different. True. So, so I worked with a coach to help me get into this creative zone. And she said, "So you know that place in you that knows everything?" And I said, "No."
No.
And she said, "Well, yeah, you do. You've been there a million times. Now you're going to learn how to go there whenever you want." And I said, "All right, prove it." So
Right.
what she did was she had me make a little list of the things that happened before these rare times when I'm in the zone and I can write all night, right?
Yeah.
So I made a little list, and so I would tell people, do what works for you. But certainly the fundamentals across all writers are to remove yourself from distractions if
Yeah.
you can. So unplug the browser. I always like to have something to drink nearby. I have a snack nearby. I like sunflower seeds. I don't know. They're very crunchy in a way, but somehow there's something about that that kind of soothes me. But
Nice.
what you do is you just try to put yourself in the here and now. And if you have a mindfulness practice, that is really golden to bring you into a creative space. And you just take yourself away, you make yourself comfortable, you surround yourself with whatever helps you be creative, maybe some nice low-key music, nothing with words, and
Love it.
get yourself into a mindful spot where you can just breathe and just settle in. And then you just start writing, and you do not censor yourself. You just let your fingers go over the keys. You don't stop and edit. Even if you think of something, you just keep going. Set a timer so you know it's only a short amount of time, maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes max. You can write 500 words in 20 minutes if you don't
Really?
stop. Yes,
Wow.
you can. And that's how I wrote a lot of my book, actually. It's like, all right, I'm going to gut this out for 20 minutes and then I'll be done. And I just brain dumped a lot of stuff. And then later on, you go back and you edit it and you rewrite it and you rewrite it until it's perfect. Anne Lamott, who's a celebrated author and writing teacher, has a wonderful line, and you're going to love this because this is you. She says, your job as a writer to start with is to write a shitty first draft.
Oh my God, I so love that.
Isn't that you?
That is so me. Yes. Perfectly.
Yeah, no. And I think what stops us is we feel like, oh God, this is so important. It has to be perfect. No, the first draft should not be perfect. You should just brain blap it out there.
And that goes for technical writing or creative writing or anything.
Any kind of writing, you know what's in your head. Another thing that gets some people started is to mind map it. And maybe
so tell us more about what that looks like.
Yeah, so that means you just kind of take your concepts, like if they're popping up in your head, and you just put them like popcorn, you just put them on a page. You can do it by hand, and you can use a blank sheet and just start putting different concepts, different places, and then you can draw circles around them and arrows and connect them all together. Or you could use, a lot of people like to use sticky notes.
I was just going to say, so I'm a sticky note girl. I mind map with sticky notes. You know, I've tried everything. I've tried the fancy schmancy programs. I've tried to draw it. But for me, sticky notes works because I'm pretty linear in my thinking. Yeah. I want to, map out all the pieces of the puzzle, and then you can just move them around so easily.
Yeah. Right. And you move them around. So you say, oh, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about that. I got to talk about this. And then you write a sticky note for each one of those points, and you're kind of clearing out your head. And as you clear it out, more things can come in. And then you can just move those sticky notes around into sections, categories. Like
so I love
intro and the major points that you're trying to make, and a conclusion, that kind of thing.
So I love this because, I know that when writing RFP responses, most people just start writing an answer to the question. There's not really any pre-planning. And what this tells me is that we should stop a little bit and think, not over plan, but then plan a little bit, right? Like it's not just about like, you're going to sit down, you're going to write the answer to this question, you're going to be done, but maybe think through how it's all going to flow, sit down and just start writing, and don't overthink it, and then go back and edit it. That to me is like an amazing process that I think most people probably aren't doing.
Well, since you say that that's what you see, then I would suggest doing the mind mapping first. Or some people like to do an outline. I don't really like to do an outline, but I find that the mind mapping is great because I can just plunk everything out there. Yeah. And have it in one place instead of jumbled in my head. And then you can just pick, all right, this sticky note, I'm going to write about this now. And another thing that Anne Lamott teaches us is you only write one little chunk at a time. And she talks about this little picture frame that she bought. I have not been able to find one this small, but she bought an inch square picture frame.
Wow.
And she says, I tell myself, your only job right now is to fill in that little inch.
Interesting.
And that also speaks to what we know about mini habits and baby steps. And see, this is why when you asked me to begin with, what's the biggest frustration? Getting started is so hard because it just feels like, all right, now I got to climb Mount Everest.
Yeah,
What am I
I've got
going
this
to do?
huge RFP response. I've also got 80 million other
Yeah,
tasks that I've got to do for clients or other RFP
right.
responses or all of that.
And I
And I
got to
like
buy
that
groceries on the way home and pick up the
right,
kids, right?
right.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
life.
And then
So
I have to be present when I get home for my family and all of that.
yeah. So it's all about chunking it down, taking the pressure off,
Yeah,
right? I
beautiful.
really am talking to myself right now too, because I'm trying to get into a new project. So it's about taking the pressure off and saying, look, it's all pretty much already in your head or in these sources that you got right beside you on your desk already, and just start thinking or talking with someone. That's another way to get going sometimes.
Yeah, like
Um,
to dictate, even to dictate over like a recording device. If
you
you're
record
driving,
it.
yep. Yeah,
Every now
just
and then when I'm commuting, when I'm driving and stuck in
yes.
traffic, I'll turn on my recorder and just start talking to myself,
Yeah,
and
no, I think that's
exercising
brilliant.
that way. And
Yeah.
people do that. Brene Brown, who's of course very popular now, the sociology professor from Houston, and she's written a lot of books. And her process I've read is talking with somebody, and once she's in a
Mm.
conversation, all this stuff starts popping and it's flowing out, and then she runs into the next room and writes it all down. She could also be recording it too. So whatever works for you. I think taking part of taking the pressure off is realizing it doesn't have to be any one way. We were taught when we were in school that we had to sit behind our desk. At least you and I were. I don't know what they do in school anymore, but you have
That was a
to
long
sit
time
behind
ago.
your desk. You can't talk. You can't sit on the floor if that's more comfortable. You have to sit at that desk and be very rigid and write for a certain amount of time about a certain thing. And it's all very regimented and authoritarian. And it's not a fun place to be. And I
No.
think we run from that. And when we think about writing in our heads, we think, oh gosh, here we go. We're back in the classroom. Instead of allowing yourself permission to forget all of that stuff and just get some initial stuff out there. And once you have it out there, then you can work with it. When I took ceramics way back in the day, I learned something which was the first step in making something beautiful, whether it's a teacup or a bowl or a vase, is you gotta put a big ugly hunk of clay on the wheel.
That's true.
You just like,
Oh
well,
my God, what a great visual.
you plop it down there, right? You've got to
Yeah.
do a little wedging first. It's like kneading bread, you wedge it, and then you kind of make a little mountain out of it, and you plop it in the middle of your wheel. And so when I teach writing, I say to people, it's just the first step is just to get some clay on the wheel. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to look like anything. It's what you're going to work with. It's your raw material. Once it's on the wheel, then you can start making it into something.
Well, and I love what you said too about, kind of back to the conversation about conversational
Yeah.
is, when I'm working with highly technical people and they're talking to me and we're just having a conversation, they talk through the process. And it's funny how when they're explaining it to me verbally to then what I get in writing, I'm like, how did it go from that to this? It's
Well,
so
now we know
heavy
how,
and
right?
formal, and yeah. So if we had just been recording that, I love that idea.
Record that.
Record, and then somebody else can transcribe that and turn that into a first draft that you can then
Yep.
go in and tweak. So what a beautiful
Yeah.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great service you could offer people too. I mean, you're doing
Yeah.
it anyway, and because you know the different pieces, you know what an RFP requires, and you can just be asking them those questions and drawing it out of them. And yes, that's exactly what I mean by conversational. They already know what they want to say pretty
Yeah.
much in their heads. It's just getting it from here to the page.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love it. All right. I have another question for you
Yeah.
because in one of your workshops, you talk about liberating your inner writer to take the pressure off. Is that what you're talking about here when you're
That's
talking about like pulling that?
that's what we're
Yeah.
talking about, right? Right.
Yes. I love that.
That's
And
what
I
we're
think
talking
that
about.
we do put so much pressure on ourselves.
Because
Oh,
guess what? Writing is just talking on paper. That's what
yeah.
it is. And we
It's
know
true.
how to do that when we're kids. We go to school and it all gets beaten out of us,
It
right?
does, right?
We have to conform,
Ugh,
and it just sometimes squeezes all the creativity out of us. And then we start to think of writing as a chore instead of just creative expression. And granted, I don't want to give the impression that writing for business is all fun and games. It's work, but there are easier ways to get into it. And it's about going back to when we knew that writing was just talking on paper and usually
right.
telling stories.
Yeah, and what I always tell people too is, stop thinking about it as answering the question because that feels hard and arduous, and think
Mhm.
about it more as sharing with them how you're going to make their lives easier or better or whatever that is. Like,
Yes.
you're giving them this gift. I don't care if you're an accountant or an actuary or a biometrics technology guru,
Yeah.
you're still going to help somebody make their lives better in some way, shape, or form. So talk about it from there. Um,
Right.
the other thing you talk about is persuasion takes strategy.
Yeah.
And you do something called reverse engineering to take readers exactly where you want them to go. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So that's where all of the rules and regulations have to come back in. So now let's go back to our pottery example. We put the big chunk of clay on the wheel. We we've made it into something now, right?
Yep.
We have put those pieces that we knew we wanted to be part of it into some sort of order. And then, well, this is about that process, really. So what I like to think of, if I can switch metaphors on you, is when I'm writing an article for a magazine, or if I'm writing um, um, a report, whatever it is, an RFP is the same thing.
Yep.
Think of it as if you are giving someone a tour of your home. So they
Okay.
come up, they pull up to your house, or maybe think of it as a realtor trying to sell a home, right?
Yep.
They pull up, and what's the first thing that's important? When you pull up to a house, you're thinking about
The
buying
curb
it.
appeal.
Curb appeal.
Yep.
Ding, ding, ding. All right, so curb appeal. So that means you've got to have a pretty enticing introduction, or people are going to say, no, can't see myself
Yep.
there, moving on,
Good
right?
point. Love
So
it.
this speaks to your introduction, and we talked about some ways to do that. Let them know you understand what's going on in their head. Tell them your story about why you do what you do and why you're so passionate about sharing your transformation with them, the gift that you were talking about.
Yep.
That's curb appeal. Once you get them in the house, then you want to take them in a very specific order through certain expected rooms,
Rooms.
right?
Yep.
We've got
Yep.
to have a living room. We got to have a kitchen. And so, maybe they're combined as a great room. We got to have bedrooms. We got to have a bathroom. We got to have a
Yep.
garage. And then as you take them out the back door, they also want to see a nice backyard where they can envision sitting with their family and friends, and maybe having a margarita or martini. um,
Martini.
yes, I know you love martinis. And and a nice barbecue or something. So
Yep.
they expect you to hit these certain spots, and the organization is about hitting those spots in a strategic way. So
Mm.
you probably don't want to start with the bathroom or the
Right.
garage,
Right.
right? So
Yep.
just think about what's important and how each chunk that you want to use in your argument, because this is an argument in favor of your unique um, ability to meet their needs, right? You're
Right.
saying to them, I hear you, you have this need. Here's why I can meet this need better than anyone else. So you want to be strategic about the reasons you can do that, and put them in an order that builds in importance. So sometimes we say save a little bit of your best stuff for last in an article. And this could be true in RFPs too. You wow them as they come in the door. It's an incredible entry, an incredible big living space.
Yep.
And then you make sure you save a little sweet spot for the end. Like,
Okay.
oh, and here's a little bonus, right?
Yeah. The theater room
So
or something like that. Yeah.
yes, oh yeah, there's a theater room. In my house, it's a dog wash. You know,
Yes, I love
I have
that.
a professional dog wash, which would only be appealing to a certain audience, right?
True.
So if
Yes.
I'm talking to cat people, I'm not going to mention the dog wash.
Right.
So that's what I mean by knowing where you want them to end up. And where you want them to end up overall in every case is being persuaded, convinced that you are the very best person for the job, the only person they really want to hire.
I love that.
Now, another part of the strategy is, of course, knowing all of the rules and regs
Yes.
of writing, of good writing, and including grammar and punctuation. And it seems like people have kind of forgotten that today. There's some great
Right?
online tools to help with
Yeah.
that. Grammarly.com is very helpful.
Grammarly is
But you
amazing.
still have to kind of know when to take their advice and when not to, because they're
Yep.
just operating off of algorithms.
Yeah.
So all of that is important. You don't want to look illiterate in your
Right.
RFP. And, you know, I would say to people, who in your organization is the best editor? And if you don't have someone in house, find someone to, you know, and just say, can I hire you to go over this? How much is this RFP potentially worth to you? It's
Yep.
potentially worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars in some cases. Hire a professional editor to go through and take care of all the grammar and style and punctuation that is not your genius.
Yes, we tell people that all the time too. So
Yeah.
you're speaking my language, my friend. I
Yeah.
love it. All right, so this is a really great segue for us to now kind of shift into this a little bit deeper dive on the storytelling piece of it. So we're going to stop this episode here, everybody. Just know that this is a 2-part episode. Next week, we will come out with the second part. So stick with us. Come back next week to listen to the second part. You have been listening to the RFP Success Show. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please make sure you click subscribe button so you don't miss a show, and come back and join us again next week.